North Carolina is a diverse state made up of communities large and small, connected through one of the nation's largest transportation systems. Spanning from the Atlantic Ocean to the Appalachian Mountains, North Carolina is also a state of many different ecosystems and landscapes, which support thousands of species of flora and fauna. As North Carolina's population grows, so do its transportation needs. Any transportation system with the scale of North Carolina's has an impact on the landscape and ecology. Part of NCDOT's mission statement includes a commitment to environmental sensitivity, and in February of 2002, NCDOT issued its official environmental stewardship policy. This policy commits the department to preserving and enhancing our natural and cultural resources while maintaining, planning, and constructing our transportation network. Preservation in North Carolina begins with our water system. Organizations such as NCDOT's Highway Stormwater program are in place to actively prevent negative impacts to North Carolina's natural environment.
I am the manager of NCDOT's Highway Stormwater program that's housed here in the hydraulics unit. And what that program does is it manages the department's implementation of our NPDES stormwater permit. It's a large program because NCDOT's transportation system is so large. We've got over 80,000 miles of roadway in North Carolina, over 200 supporting facilities such as maintenance yards, ferry terminals, that sort of thing. So what our program does is manages the stormwater, develops the policies and the procedures and the various practices to manage stormwater across all these various transportation facilities. We've got an environmental stewardship policy, the department, that says that we'll operate with environmental sensitivity. We also have that same similar type of statement in our mission statement. So it's really part of the culture of NCDOT to operate in a manner that's sensitive to the environment. Our Highway Stormwater program was initiated in 1998. So now, in 2015, our program has gotten fairly mature, and over that time, we've made a number of improvements. Some examples include our good housekeeping practices at our maintenance facilities. At the start of this program, many of our, our brine tanks for winter weather operations, salt tanks, didn't have secondary containment in the event of a spill. Now most all of them do, so that's an important achievement. We have a strong education program where we go throughout the state talking with our maintenance workers, folks at the maintenance yards, and teaching them the importance of stormwater management. Teaching them simple things like not to hose off your truck at the end of a day of paving and allow that water to go down into the storm drain system, which could lead to a local creek. Rather, we have special wash pads that we've built, and they are trained to use those wash pads to prevent that dirt, grime, and so forth from getting into the creek. We have 17 major river basins in the state. Many of them do have water supply reservoirs in those basins. In the Neuse River Basin, NCDOT is very interested in looking at stormwater treatment technologies that remove nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus. In this particular site, the Interstate 540 bridge over Mingo Creek has deck drains in it, like many bridges do. Those drains are important because you don't want stormwater to pond on the road and cause hydroplaning. Sometimes we can just discharge the stormwater directly over the floodplain, but if we have particularly sensitive waters underneath, we don't want to do a direct discharge into the stream. So we'll put, on some occasions, a closed drainage system, connect that to the deck drains, and take it to the mainland site for treatment and ultimate discharge. In this facility, we have several things. We've got 2 bioretention basins, one built to full standard size according to standard design specs, and the second bioretention basin is built at half size. And what we found in this particular study, comparing a full-size bioretention basin to a half-size one, is that that half-size basin actually gave more than 50% of the benefit of the full-size one. The reason why that's very significant is in the linear transportation environment, we are often struggling with space, right-of-way space to put stormwater BMPs. So it's really useful to know that if we have to shoehorn a stormwater BMP into a location due to restricted space and it can't be built to the full design specs, we now have confidence and data to show that it still has very good environmental benefit. And then the other device that was out there that was actually not really a device, and that's the beauty of it, is the outlet into the woods. We refer to that as an environmental site design, where we carefully select a location to discharge stormwater out into a wooded area. Typically, if a pipe's involved, we would put a preformed scour hole at the end of the pipe to dissipate energy before that stormwater is spread out into the woods. And we intentionally selected a spot with a tortuous path using the old farm furrows that you might have seen out there to force the water to kind of meander through the woods before it hit the stream. And thereby we increase again the dropping out of pollutants, the infiltration of stormwater, which also reduces pollutant load. So that's a really nice technique because it's by definition essentially no maintenance, low cost, but it's still very, very effective.
In addition to working to improve water quality statewide, NCDOT has programs in place to protect plant and animal species as well. Formed in response to the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, NCDOT's Project Development and Environmental Analysis Group, or PDEA, is charged with ensuring all NCDOT projects are conducted in an environmentally ethical manner. Across its history, PDEA has logged many successes for the flora and fauna of North Carolina, including several species of freshwater mussels.
Freshwater mussels are some of the most imperiled species that we have in North Carolina.
For freshwater mussels, there are several reasons that the whole really taxa group is in decline. A lot of that is land use change, so we have runoff, sedimentation, urban development that changes not only maybe water temperature parameters, but also the levels of silt and sediment in our streams. And it changes the hydrogeography and hydrology of the river as well. Also, damming has caused declines of freshwater mussels because it creates habitat fragmentation, it restricts the movement of the host fish for freshwater mussels. Another thing is invasive. So as we get invasives like the Asian clam moving in, they can outcompete the native unionid mussels and other native species.
Freshwater mussels provide a variety of ecosystem services. They filter the water column, so they're suspension feeders that filter algae and detritus and bacteria from the water column. So in that way, they're helping clean the water that's available for recreational use or drinking water use, or just as habitat for other species. They also serve as food for a variety of mammals, raccoons, muskrat, bear in some areas. They also have on their shells an entire micro-ecosystem of bacteria and protozoans that play a role in the basic function of that stream habitat. And it really takes all of those species and the various niches that they fill in those streams to retain a stream as a healthy stream.
When a species is put on an endangered species list, it increases regulatory responsibility for partners and for people who may have impact for that species, like the NCDOT. And so if we're able to provide funding and support to prevent that animal from becoming listed, we don't have the regulatory burden that would normally incur with working with that species.
The dwarf wedge mussel, which is a species that occurs in North Carolina, in the eastern part of North Carolina, tends to be very, very sensitive to water quality issues. Right now, one project that has the potential to impact the dwarf wedge mussel is the Complete I-540 project. And one of the first things that we realized was that Swift Creek, which is the Swift Creek sub-basin that we are concerned about with the dwarf wedge mussel, we really didn't have a very good handle on how well the dwarf wedge mussel is doing there. We asked NCDOT and the Federal Highway Administration to help us acquire additional information to see what the status of the dwarf wedge mussel is in the Swift Creek subbasin. And this is a hypothetical, but if Swift Creek actually is improving in its water quality, if the habitat is improving, one of the possible things that could be done to help benefit the dwarf wedge mussel would be to do augmentation, to do some captive propagation of the species and put some mussels back into the stream if again, if the habitat has stabilized, if it can support them.
So back in 2005, DOT provided funding for some of the early research into captive propagation in North Carolina. And they did this through partnership support and funding through North Carolina State University, Drs. Jay Levine and Chris Eads. And during that time, they were able to kind of close some of the knowledge gaps that existed.
We have a long-standing relationship with the Department of Transportation. We've been working with in cooperation with the DOT for more than a decade, looking to propagate freshwater bivalves, freshwater mussels, unionids in particular, and working towards eventually augmenting remaining populations with those animals that are propagated in the laboratory. So each time a bridge is targeted for renovation or construction, new construction, an environmental assessment has to be conducted of the stream site where the bridge is going to be constructed. If freshwater mussels are present at the site and it happens to be one of the species that is considered either federally or state listed or as endangered or threatened or of special concern, then additional consideration has to be made for that species in the construction process.
This is Lake Myra. It's an impoundment on Marks Creek, about 40 acres in size. We have raised, I think, 4 different species here. We've raised the yellow lamp mussel, the eastern lamp mussel, the Atlantic pigtoe, and now the Tar River spiny mussel, which is actually federally endangered. Mussels require attachment to the gills or fins of a fish to complete their life cycle. So in the laboratory at NC State, we take them through that process there, where we bring in females who then release their brood or all of their larvae. We will attach the larvae onto the fish in the laboratory, hold the fish. While the fish are in the lab, the larvae undergo a transformation, a metamorphosis. And then in 2 to 3 weeks, they'll fall off the fish onto the bottom of the fish tank, and then at that point we start rearing them in small aquaria or small tanks, usually until they're about 3 to 5 millimeters in size. When they first come off the fish, they're less than 2/10 of a millimeter in size. So it takes a while for them to get up to a size where we're comfortable putting them out here. But once they reach that 3-5 millimeter mark, usually it's the following spring. They've spent about 10 to 11 months in the laboratory, and we bring them out here and put them in floating cages. The pond has provided great growth to the mussels, to all the species that we put out here.
Another nice thing that we've been, able to do with Department of Transportation support is we've been able to circumvent completely the use of fish. So raising mussels in the laboratory requires fish, requires personnel to maintain the drop-off of those species as they're going through their metamorphosis and dropping off as juveniles. And we've been able to do this in the lab in petri dishes now without any fish at all. So we picked up on some techniques that were done by other laboratories, and we're actually in small flasks in the lab, in an incubator, can raise thousands of these things, and then we take them into the lab and we grow them. So since 2006, the Appalachian elk toe, which is present in rivers in the western part of the state, in particular Little Tennessee and Tuckasegee rivers, has been in decline in the Little Tennessee River. There was a kind of tandem population, parallel population in the Tuckasegee River. Both rivers are in the same basin, but in one, the Appalachian elk toe was declining, and the other was thriving.
One of the things we have looked into with help from the Department of Transportation is a research project that's been carried out at NC State University. They have tried to gather as much information as possible about habitat parameters, about water quality and water chemistry. They've collected information about the watershed, what might be going on in the watershed, and even kept captively propagated animals out in the river for about a year so that those animals could then be studied to look at their metabolomics, which means the things that they're eating and how they're processing those foodstuffs, and any other sign that they might be in distress.
North Carolina State University also did an assessment of state hatcheries to see which of the hatcheries would be able to support a larger production facility for freshwater mussels and some non-game fish. And one of those facilities was Marion. This facility is responsible for the captive propagation, holding, and release of rare aquatic species, including freshwater mussels, freshwater fish, and even some giant salamanders. Over here on the docks, we have one of our long-term grow-out locations, part of the CAC, and we're able to take juvenile mussels and put them in the dock and able to increase our growth and survival so that we can get animals to a size that we can put tags on them and then to release them back into North Carolina waters. This helps us augment rare populations and also do some reintroductions as well. Freshwater mussels are cool. I mean, they're not a mega, fauna, charismatic megafauna, but they have a very unique life cycle.
One of the successes of this whole effort has been the cooperation that has been afforded between the NC Wildlife Resource Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Department of Transportation, NC State Museum of Natural Sciences, the university, and we have this terrific collaborative effort that all of us have been investing into learning about these species, and we've had some true successes, and we've been able to propagate now more than 23 different species in the laboratory, and a lot of that's been supported by the Department of Transportation. We've had funding for very specifically to propagate some of the endangered and threatened species.
Another species that has been the beneficiary of NCDOT mitigation efforts is the red-cockaded woodpecker, or RCW. In 2 areas in the eastern part of the state, NCDOT and its partners have seen RCW populations grow since the acquisition of 2 key mitigation sites.
Well, historically, the red-cockaded woodpecker inhabited up to 92 million acres of pine forest habitat in the southeastern United States, and now it only inhabits less than 3 million acres of pine forest. So it's been mostly habitat loss and also fire suppression. It generally is a species that needs a pine forest that's been burned. The exception would be at the areas around P3 where it's much wetter and actually too wet to burn in some cases. P3 stands for the Palmetto Pear Tree Preserve. P3 is a conservation bank that was set up back in 1999 for red-cockaded woodpeckers. The NCDOT had anticipated some RCW impacts in the area, especially with the US 64 widening projects and some other projects as well within the coastal plain. And so there was the need to go ahead and be proactive and kind of bank some credits for future use to debit for impacts to the species from DOT projects. And it started in 1999 with a baseline of 23 red-cockaded woodpecker active groups or active clusters. And it has grown to today well over 33 groups. So at least 10 additional groups have been added through proper management.
We are here on the Callaway Tract. It's a 2,500 acre tract. It's mainly longleaf pine. It's an RCW mitigation site that was bought by DOT in 2001 and handed over to the Nature Conservancy to manage. The Callaway Tract, like I said, is mainly forested by longleaf pine of different ages. And it's your typical RCW habitat with longleaf pine, wiregrass, understory ecosystem. This is the type of habitat that RCWs prefer. This is like their prime habitat. They use the longleaf pines to create their cavities. They're the only woodpecker to excavate cavities in live trees. And they do this by forming also resin wells around the cavities to help create sap flow, which helps keep out predators.
This evening we're hopefully going to be catching an unbanded red-cockaded woodpecker female. This group is fairly unique this year. You run into it every once in a while, but there were 2 breeding females associated with this group. We know that because of the large number of eggs that we found during our early monitoring process. We know who one of those females is, and then there was, as we were accounting for all the fledglings, we noticed a second bird that's unbanded, and we suspect that that is a female that was responsible for the extra eggs that we found.
And DOT purchased the property because as DOT builds roads and widens roads, even through avoidance and minimization, they may impact RCW habitat. And so mitigation sites were bought to offset for those impacts. When the property was first purchased by DOT, there were only 5 active clusters on the property, and through the management of the Nature Conservancy, we now have 7 active clusters, and they're all, as of 2015 breeding season, they have all bred young and fledged young.
In addition to animal species, rare, threatened, and endangered plants are sometimes the focus of NCDOT projects. North Carolina is one of the most ecologically diverse states in the nation, with more than 4,000 known native species of plants. Thanks to the partnerships fostered by NCDOT with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program, the North Carolina Plant Conservation Program, and others, there are many tales of successful mitigation efforts of North Carolina's imperiled flora.
Well, this project is a bridge replacement project that started a couple years ago, I guess. During the process of collecting information for permitting, we found an endangered, threatened plant along a stream, along the road shoulder. It was too late at that point, I guess, to redesign the road, or couldn't make it work, so we had to figure out how to accommodate the plant. And, well, we coordinated with Fish and Wildlife Service and came up with a plan to harvest the plants, take some cuttings and try and propagate some, and also take bare root plants and relocate them once the stream had been relocated, and we did that last spring.
Yeah, this was a bridge replacement over Lakey Creek, which is a tributary to the Little Tennessee River in Macon County, North Carolina. An employee with the Department of Transportation named Owen Anderson, who has since retired, noticed a very small remnant population of a species called Virginia spirea, which is Spirea virginiana. This plant was situated along a first-order stream that ran under a culvert and discharged into Lakey Creek, right adjacent to the bridge. And due to the placement of the water features, there was really just no way to put this bridge in that could avoid the plants. And so we started talking with Owen and the engineers, and we devised a plan that we would propagate these plants, and we would move the parents, and as soon as possible after grading was done and reestablishment of this first order stream was completed, we would move the plants back in, and we would start restoring them right back in as close as possible to where they had come from.
We're actually doing something on the ground that allows the bridge to go in, and at the same time, hopefully long term will help the plants. It looks like it's doing pretty good.
Yeah, I think this project is a resounding success, and really the key word is partnership. I think that working together with an establishment like the Department of Transportation that has a lot of resources, a lot of people in a lot of different places, and has a wide reach, being collaborative is definitely the key. On this project, I think we've achieved great things. It did not require very lengthy consultation. It did not require a whole lot of money. It didn't require engineering design changes other than what was already planned for this site. And on this particular project, the project schedule would have been delayed by a redesign. We discovered these plants pretty late in the process, and so to try and go back and change anything would have really cost a lot in time, and I'm sure in dollars as well. And so by being able to work together and come up with what I consider to be an innovative solution, and really doing our best to work together to make it happen, I think we've achieved everybody's goals, and we'll continue to learn more from this as we go forward.
The Corbett and Plantation Road sites are two wetland mitigation sites located just north of Wilmington, North Carolina. They were set aside by the North Carolina Department of Transportation to protect wetlands and mitigate for wetland impacts to a highway project located nearby. Well, this site is known to occur a population of rough-leaved loosestrife, a federally endangered plant that's known from about 30 locations in North and South Carolina. And there are other state-listed species on this site, such as the Venus flytrap and some other rare orchids and other species.
The Corbett Tract and Plantation Road Tract were purchased as part of the mitigation for R2405A, which is the Wilmington connector. And these tracts were purchased for the federally endangered species that occurs here, rough-leaved loosestrife. And there's a lot of other rare species that occur here as well. But this was for mitigation for the species that were found alongside the proposed corridor for the Wilmington connector.
One of the unique things about protecting this site is that it occurs within close proximity of Wilmington, North Carolina, which is one of the fastest growing cities in North Carolina. And all of the natural areas in the immediate area are under threat to residential and commercial development. So it's great that NCDOT was able to protect this property and prevent it from ever being developed.
Since monitoring began in 2004, the population has had ups and downs, but the latest population monitoring results were at 260 stems, which is the highest that it's ever been, stem density-wise.
Over the last 20 or 30 years, NCDOT has been an excellent partner in working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a variety of other conservation partners in North Carolina to protect some of the rare species and rare habitats in eastern North Carolina.
NCDOT continues to partner with other agencies at the federal and state level to be a good steward of North Carolina's precious natural resources. The successful implementation of PDEA recommendations has resulted in lower construction costs and prevention of further imperilment of North Carolina's natural environment. By working to connect the people and places of North Carolina through our extensive transportation system while providing security and safety to the species of North Carolina, NCDOT is able to provide a better level of service to the public for today and tomorrow.